Thank you, Mac. As you said, I'd like to read a statement here and then answer your questions. It has been a long week dealing with the aftermath of postponing this game, but our week pales in comparison to the families of those who lost their lives, their homes, their jobs, or who were impacted in any way due to Hurricane Matthew. Our sincere thoughts and prayers are with those so impacted. The realities of their situation hopefully allows some perspective. After all, we're talking about a game. However, we recognize the importance of the game to the Southeastern Conference and the respective schools, fan bases. And as we've indicated from day one, we would actively work with the SEC and LSU to reschedule the game, understanding the entire situation was not perfect. As the week progressed, however, it became abundantly clear this was going to be a difficult negotiation. LSU had drawn a line in the sand and was simply refusing to consider any other options presented except those consistent with the line they had drawn. I've been part of this league for 40 years, with the last 25 as athletic director of Florida. Through the years, I have been part of a number of difficult conversations that we discussed as a family. Like all such conversations, there were differences, but behind closed doors, we were able to get to a good place as a league that is very special to the University of Florida and very special to so many people. However, after a conference call yesterday between both schools, it was apparent that the only option that allowed this league to escape a very hard reality and move forward with our season was a concession made by Florida, and that was to play this year's game in Baton Rouge and next year's in Gainesville. Coach McElwain is totally supportive of our decision. There were a lot of moving parts to this decision, and Commissioner Sankey was the key in all of them coming together for Florida. He worked tirelessly to make this all work. We recognize fully this decision will not be accepted by all. We ask for your trust and understanding. It is the right one for the university and this conference. The league is a family, and sometimes members of the family have to make a decision that is in the best long-term interest of the family. This is what makes this conference great, in my opinion. Working together has always been a part of the culture of this league, and it must continue. Hopefully time can heal any wounds that exist. It usually does. Now we just need to move forward with what's most important, our student athletes and the balance of our league schedule. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Jeremy, for those of us that aren't very bright, that did not know that there was a rule that you have to play the 8 games to be eligible for Atlanta. I mean, was this something that was common knowledge? Do you think that the athletic director at LSU understood this rule, or do you know?
As far as being common knowledge, Pat, I couldn't tell you what page in the rule book it was in. I just know that everybody contemplates playing 8 conference games. I think that's why Greg was so insistent that the game would be played. And candidly, to say that I knew you had to play 8 games to be in the conference championship game, I never contemplated anything else besides playing 8 games.
Given, as you say, you've been at the school 40 years and have such an affinity for the Gators, I know you were supposed to be retired by now, but are you glad in a way that you were able to kind of see this through versus just dumping it on the guys just walking into this situation?
Yeah, no question about that. And, yet I've been in constant contact with Scott because he has great insights. I gave him a little briefing as to this press conference and some things I wanted to say tonight, and he gave me some great insights as to maybe a way to say it better. But I think there's no question because I know the campus, I know the city, I know what we were dealing with here. I've dealt with hurricanes in Gainesville here before. Obviously, this kind of took on a different life of its own. But Scott is he's more than capable of dealing with stuff like this. There's no question in my mind about that. I've seen him do it. But I don't think coming out of the chute, this would have been the best thing for him to have to deal with because, candidly, it's been hard. It's been hard on a lot of people, obviously. But as I said earlier, not as hard as people were dealing with life and death situations.
Are you surprised that it was as contentious and one-sided in some ways as it was?
I was surprised it became difficult. As I alluded to earlier, I've been in a lot of difficult conversations in this league on a lot of different subjects, and most of the time you get to a good place, and and it's not as difficult as it may appear, and this one was difficult. Being that as it may be, is it's a resolution, and most of all, I think it's a resolution that's good for the Southeastern Conference. I think it gives our fans an unbelievable home schedule next year. Breaks up a difficult back-to-back game at road at LSU, and then home to Texas A&M. Now both those games are at home, but I understand there's some sacrifices too, and not insignificant ones. But again, Florida wanted to do what we felt in the big picture was the best for the Southeastern Conference, and that's why we did what we did.
Steve in the back to the right.
Jeremy, speaking of that, can you let us, going forward, if something like this happens again, the SEC, chancellors, what will happen that way to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I think Greg and the league said in their statement that there has to be some further discussion on this, that there was some the rules did not contemplate this, maybe not totally clear in terms of the commissioner's authority of what could or could not be done, what are the alternatives. It's a difficult situation. I mean, obviously, LSU and Florida did not see eye to eye on this situation, but I also understand the fact that, they are dealing with situations too. And so, and candidly, it's hard for me to say that right now, but I do understand that. And so trying to move schedules around in a short period of time is extremely difficult. And I assure you that Commissioner Sankey looked at a lot of different options, trying to make this work. Changing the schedule in midstream is extremely hard. I do think, obviously, unfortunately, now that this situation has happened, there'll be a lot of conversation on how to prevent it from happening again. I think the lines of authority will be much clearer. There'll be, I promise you this will be a huge issue on the athletic director's agenda in December. And as you said, Edgar, I will not be at that meeting, but also going forward with the president's chancellors and in Destin, okay?
Do you know what the economic impact is for losing one game, I guess one home game to just Gainesville? Not the
I don't know that. I mean, I'll be honest with you, at the end of the day, and, as I said earlier, Coach Mack has been, terrific. So, because of the way he is and the competitor that he is, and as he said, he'd play this game anytime, anywhere. So he'll deal with our football team, and I think the impact on our football team will be minimized because of his leadership. The thing that bothers me most is the economic impact to Gainesville. Obviously, that'll be made up next year to some extent because we'll have a game that was supposed to be on the road. And under any scenario, I mean, if LSU came here on the 19th or whatever, all the things we've been discussed, we were going to lose a home game because we lost the game last weekend, right? So it is a difficult. That is the most difficult part of this conversation for us. It's also reality, and we're not insensitive to that, but I don't have a solution to that. You understand why we're at where we're at. I just alluded to it, and we're sorry. As I said, this is a far less than perfect situation for a lot of people. But again, the decision that was made, we feel is in the best interest of, as I said, the league and the long-term interest in the league in particular.
Was LSU just reluctant to give up a home game? They weren't going to budge on that, and maybe that made it difficult?
I was on a couple conference calls with, Joe Oliva and Dr. Alexander. I was not in the other room with them. I think a lot of the conversations between them was between the league and them. So I would not want to guess, what their motivation was. But, obviously, as I said earlier, I became apparent it was going to be a difficult negotiation, and it was. And so this is where we are. And, again, we understand the difficulties of changing the schedule. But I will not want to speak for LSU in that situation.
Thomas and then Zach.
Hey, Thomas.
Hey, Jeremy. Were the other options that were, I guess, on the table, were those discussed between the three schools, or was it clear from LSU drawing a line in the sand that those weren't realistic?
Well, as I said earlier, I just think that LSU took a position early on that was important to them, the position they were committed to. I'm not privy to the conversations fully between them and the commissioner. But as I said in my statement, it was obvious that they were committed to that position and that it was going to be difficult to change that position. And therefore, that we felt the only way, as I said, to escape an even more difficult situation it was to make the decision that we did. I think it would have been a huge mistake, in my opinion, in my staff's opinion, and Dr. Fox's position, for the University of Florida to draw a line in the sand. Then what do we have, okay? And nothing good would have come out of that. And at the end of the day, it's the time to, step up and do what you think is right and go play a football game. As I said a couple of times tonight, it's less than perfect. But again, they were committed to their position, and while I may not agree with it, I respect that they're trying to do what they think is best for their institution as well.
Jeremy, from the comments that he made in the media and the line in the sand that you say he drew, are you agitated at all by the way Joe Oliva handled this process?
Well, again, we can sit here and look back. Someone called me today and still doesn't understand, why we didn't play on Sunday or Monday. And looking back gets us nothing, okay? We're trying to look forward here. We're trying to do what's right for the league. We're trying to put this behind us. Everybody's got football games this weekend, and I'll be honest with you, from my perspective and a few people around me, it's hard to even believe it's almost Friday. We got a game to go play. I know Coach Mack has our players focused, and we'll be ready to play. And obviously, we're playing a very, very good Missouri team. But Zach, I'm not comfortable looking back. What's happened has happened. What was said, and no purpose is gained by rehashing that or even commenting on it, right? What is important is that we've come to a resolution that at the end of the day is going to be good for the Southeastern Conference, and that's what's important.
And I know you say you don't want to look back, but I want to ask you the same thing I asked McElwain on Monday, just the rhetoric over the weekend that this was somehow your guys' fault, and that even suggesting that you guys tried to dodge this game. How much did that upset you?
Well, this is totally outside of the decision or anything else. I've been surprised about that all week. I get the importance of football, and no bigger football fan than myself, and I understand how important football is to the Southeastern Conference in the South. We had a Category 4 hurricane headed this way. Could have been catastrophic to the state. It was difficult enough for so many people, and to think that we're trying not to play a football game for any reason, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I have had the same problem that Max had with that. It's almost, Zach, that as if the worst had happened, everybody could understand why we did what we did, right? Well, bad things happen, but the worst didn't happen. So I've never understood that rhetoric, and I don't think people understand that there's not just an athletic director or an athletic department making a decision on that football game. We're getting a lot of input from a lot of people. There are a lot of pros in this town who know more about this stuff than we do. And we're taking advice from them, and we're trying to help them, and it's a decision made by the campus. So I get it, but I think it's evident that the University of Florida is not afraid to play anybody. I think this decision is kind of indicative of that, because we're going to Baton Rouge. It was a storm, and it was a major one, and though there were a lot of people impacted, we were blessed it wasn't worse than it was.
Thank you. On the football side, just how challenging does this make the team's schedule here? And closing out November now.
Well, I mean, that's another part of the deal. That's not perfect. That's where my confidence in Coach Mack and his leadership and the way he is. And the one thing about Coach Mack, he doesn't make excuses. He's not belly aching. He's not even, that didn't even come up in this conversation. In terms of Jeremy, it'll make it tougher to go play in Tallahassee. That's not his nature. He'll compete, and he always has, and that's why we love him. That's why we love having him here. So it's difficult, but we've had difficult schedules around here before. We won games around here when you're playing, Alabama and Georgia and LSU back to back. It's part of being a Southeastern Conference. So is it ideal? No, but nothing about this has been ideal. But I go back, I want to say it again and again. For those people who don't have homes, their lives aren't ideal. My sister had a tree go through her house. Her life, everybody's okay, but her house isn't okay, and it's not ideal to come home to a house that's, that's not the way it was a week ago. So that's certainly more important than what we're talking about here.
In terms of budget challenge for you guys, because now I know you get reimbursed for the Presbyterian game now, but you're going to lose significant revenue from this game that you'll recoup next year. How's that all work?
Yeah, well, obviously the experts on my staff will figure all that out, but in essence, you're going to loan yourself the money for this year and pay yourself back next year. We're blessed to have an athletic program and has some resources because of our fan base, and that'll all work out. I mean, again, we'll work it out. There are some people here in town who aren't going to be able to work it out because they lost 2 home games, and I'm not going to stay away. I'm not going to step back from that, and it's unfortunate. And if I could wave a wand and fix that, I would. Can't. All right. some of that's mitigated next year, but next year probably doesn't help a lot of people right now.
Jeremy, you mentioned Commissioner Sankey and his role in this. How adamant was he? Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of, did he say, look, this game's got to be played, sit in the room? What exactly was his role here in making this happen?
Well, I mean, certainly as a commissioner, he understands the importance of playing SEC football games. He also knew that you can't sit here and try to figure out who's going to play in Atlanta if you haven't played a full complement of games. What's the solution there? Talk about a tough decision. You're going to put a one-loss team in there, didn't play the full complement of games. You can't even have that conversation. So he was adamant about that. I would tell you he worked tirelessly to try to get this to come together earlier. Again, for a guy who sat in a room as long as I have, when football schedules have been discussed, it is really hard. It is really hard. It's hard enough just getting your regular season schedule done. Okay, so to try to move things around right now, difficult. And Greg Sankey, nobody has greater admiration for him than I do. I know how hard he worked to make it all fit together. But the one thing, as we kept moving forward, that was adamant, was we were going to play this football game. All right, and obviously, as he said in his release, and I said earlier, the decision by Florida has allowed that to happen, and so we're going to play it, and whoever's in Atlanta is going to have earned their spot there, and there'll be no more controversy as far as that's concerned.
As far as the negotiations, is this just a straight home game for LSU as far as they can host recruits, tickets, and everything like that?
Yeah, it's their home game. But obviously they lose a pretty significant home game next year, and we'll be hosting recruits here back-to-back, A&M and LSU and FSU and Tennessee. So, things always have a way of working out. And so what may not be ideal in the moment for the Gators is going to come back to us in spades a year from now. So, again, I'm saying that with understanding that for some people they're certainly impacted differently. But, yeah, it's their home game.
And how were the ADs at both South Alabama and Presbyterian as far as working with you guys this week?
Well, Florida didn't deal with South Alabama at all. Obviously, that's LSU's situation. That was their home game. But Presbyterian has been wonderful with us. They understood. We made them aware early on that probably the only flexibility we were going to have in this whole situation, unless the league was able to move a lot of dominoes around, was November 19th. And, you have a game like that, you're Presbyterian, this is a big trip for them. This is probably their donor trip. This is probably a trip that their team has looked forward to, playing in the swamp. And that got taken away from them. So obviously they're impacted, but they couldn't have been more professional. Brian Reese, their AD, is a first-class guy. And, they weren't difficult at all. And, we appreciate their efforts very, very much.
I'm sure you were crazy busy today, but I was wondering if you saw the Bleacher Report article released today about Will Greer's situation, his side of the story, and what you thought about it.
I'm so glad I was so busy today because I did not read the article and I couldn't tell you one thing about it. I know there's an article out there about Will. Will obviously, was a Gator, and we always said we're going to support him, and we'll continue to support him, and we'll root for him unless the Gators are playing West Virginia. And then we'll root for him to do well, but we'll root for the Gators to win. But I have not read the article.
Any final questions for Jeremy?
Thank you guys for coming in late notice. Appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. Have a good night. Goodbye.